Welcome to Soulful Practices podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Holling-Brooks, and over the past 20 years, I have been on a journey of healing and awakening. I'm also a coach and practitioner for clients on their journey of unbridling their true self. The number one question I'm asked is, what meditation or practice will help me reach my goals? While there is no one meditation or secret mantra that will unlock our own awakening, there is a doorway that will lead us there. And that's the doorway of learning and cultivating the skills of self-reflection and contemplation. Each episode of this podcast offers you pocket teachings and practices that you can implement right away to help you courageously connect with living your authentic soul-led life. Let's dive into this week's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 24 of Soulful Practices. Oh my goodness, I am so excited, and I can't hardly believe that this is the last episode in season 2 coming to a close. And the whole season, throughout this season, we have been focusing on a core theme over the last 12 episodes of cultivating more love and more compassion for ourselves so that we can really work at allowing ourselves to free ourselves from the way in which fear makes us move and engage and relate with ourselves, with our lives, with the choices that we have within it, within our careers, how we relate to our friends and family, and even out to our community and to all beings. And I was kind of sifting through all the quotes and looking at what would really help bring this together and allow us to kind of pull the essence of this forward into a beautiful practice to end on. And the quote that I finally kind of brought forward was a beautiful quote by Kristin Neff that says, "Remember that if you really want to motivate yourself, love is more powerful than fear." Let me just say that again. Remember, if you really want to motivate yourself, love is more powerful than fear. Oh, I just really love that quote. And I think especially right now, it is so it just is like something to root yourself back into. And Kristin Neff, she's a teacher, a speaker, and she specializes in compassion work and bringing compassion into our lives. And how do we work with that? And what does that look like? And we can really use that right now. Before I dive into this week's teachings and how that we're going to build off of this quote and the practice for it, I just want to pause and really quick say that as we're coming to the end of this season, I felt it would be really fun. I've been getting questions throughout the different seasons, season 1 and season 2, like, "Hey, Michelle, I've been working on this practice. I have a couple questions about this. You said this. I would love some more insights onto that. Here's my thoughts of what was working in this practice. Where do I go from here?" And I thought, wow, what it would be super fun to come together as a community of beautiful Soulful Practice listeners and come and gather in a place where I can answer those questions live. And so on Friday, you want to save the date, and I'll have the link below to register in the show notes. On Friday, November 22nd of 2024, I'm going to have a live meeting and a gathering from 1 to 2:30 p.m. where we're going to come together, do a little bit of a sitting meditation to kind of ground us and get us in there, and then opening up that time to you as the listeners to share and to ask questions about the first 2 seasons. We have a lot. There's 24 different episodes, 24 different practices to pick from that you can do, and kind of either share with us something of how that's been really working for you. Maybe there's a working edge, like, "Wow, Michelle, I know I really need to," my soul is saying there's something here in this practice, but yet it's just something I'm struggling with. I'm not gelling with it. Can you help support me on how to help bring this in? Because I can feel that it wants to be here, but I keep hitting wall after wall. And truly, ultimately, what we're looking for is to find a way to liberate ourselves from the way in which fear makes us move, from the way in which it tries to motivate us into change and into lasting change and true healing, and really liberate that ability for us to courageously live our authentic life. Take off those bumpers of those protective mechanisms and step in to who our soul truly wants us to be. That's what we're really up to here in Soulful Practices. And so I thought it would be great to come in and offer that space. And I might start to do this at the end of every season, or maybe in the middle if it goes over well, of all these beautiful ways in which we can connect and really realize that we're not alone in a desire to want to implement how we're engaging our life, the choices that we're making in them, the way we'd want to engage the people around us, is really from this place of rooted in love and compassion, right? So just know that that's there. Sign up, join me. I can't wait to see you live and have that opportunity to connect with you in person. I mean, that just seems so fun to me. Okay, and then also please note that this is the end of the season, and I usually take off a month between seasons, but this one I'm going to be taking off a full 2 months. So the rest of November and in December, and picking back up with episode 3 at the first of the year, so January 2025. Sounds a little crazy for me to be saying that. And that's just because my kiddos have more time off this time of year with between fall break and Christmas break, and I want to be available to be to them because that is part of me being in balance and living my soul-led life. But I'm sure that I won't be able to resist showing up with some little tidbits and videos here and there. So be on the lookout for those and kind of keep track of, like, hit that subscribe button below so that when I post a little thing in that says, hey, I have an opportunity, you'll be able to get that, since it won't be coming out on a weekly basis between now and the end of the year. Okay, so now let's dive into the Pocket Teacher for episode 24 of season 2, our last season last episode of this season, and that is with Kristin Neff. And again, it is, remember that if you really want to motivate yourself, love is more powerful than fear. Love is more powerful than fear. So right now, where we are at, especially in the United States and out into the whole world, I would say, is that there is very easy and understandable how we could feel an urge to really dig ourselves in to trying to rally in and motivate ourselves into actions, into reactions, into protective mechanisms that are based and housed in fear, based and housed in more division, based and housed in that tribal shadowism of us versus them. And these fears are really going around right now because everything feels unstable. We don't know what's going to happen financially, housing wise, health and wellness wise, the ability to freely share and be who you are. It feels like the world as a whole is trying to shove itself back into the old ways and find that way of feeling safe again, when really what we're being asked to do is have this transformational shift that breaks us out of all the old systems, of all the old paradigms, and really invites us into moving and motivating ourselves through love. That as a collective, we no longer see things as only commodities, including other humans, and we really want to give all beings, humans and non-humans, that ability to see the light that's within them, to do what I call see through the eyes of the soul, where everything has equal value and love and respect. And then therefore how we move and interact with each other is based in that. It's housed in that. It's already there. The way in which we motivate ourselves comes from love, compassion, beautiful, healthy boundaries, beautiful desires to know that true empowerment. Empowerment means I have power within me and you have power within you. And whenever I empower myself, I'm automatically offering that same power to you. It's not a win or lose. It's not a winner takes all, loser go homes and licks its little wounds and stuff like that. So we collectively truly are at this crossroads where we're being asked to look at some hard stuff, to look at what's been behind the curtain, running in the background of these shadow dominance and controls, and really recognizing how systemic they are and how inherited they are and why are they stuck? Well, they're stuck because it's generational trauma and abuse that has come forward in a way that has brought in these protective stances that are willing to make exchanges because they don't know their own worth. They don't know that innate beauty that is within you, and they don't know that they're going to be safe to get out of the codes of scarcity and comparison and domination and control and open to these other ones. So while it's understandable to want to batten down the hatches and go behind protective walls and go into us versus them things, that doesn't bring us into the energy that is trying to take root. And we can be those grounding rods, right? We can be the ones asking the beautiful, wise question that says, how do we step into the change that each and one of us is feeling bubbling up within us? How do we step into that personally? How do we step into that collectively? How do we do it in a way that releases us from having these unconscious control mechanisms and attachments guiding us from the shadow, forcing us to move from fear, forcing us to like spur ourselves on into shadow coercions and take actions that ultimately enslave us versus break us free, right? And the first being that really needs to be free, where our attention really needs to go, is to ourselves, right? To our individual, how we're talking to ourselves, how we're treating ourselves, how are we motivating ourselves? How are we inviting ourselves to break free from these codes? How are we inviting ourselves to take on that systemically and globally influence of the power dynamics? How's that reflected within ourselves, within our thoughts, within our ideas, within our purchasing power, within all the choices that we make? So if we bring it to ourselves first and we house ourselves in living our life through this why, that ripples out. And that ripples out in a way that can begin to motivate both ourselves and another to remember this light that is within each and every one of us, to remember that each and every one of us wants to wake up, break out of this trance, right? To break out of that trance of division and fear, and allowing our hearts and our souls to let us see, sense, hear, feel, and know that there are other options. So the change begins with us personally, and knowing that the beautiful mystical law, what is in one is in the whole, that if I liberate myself from these shadow fears and ways in which I am allowing things to have authority over me based in that, then I become a beacon for the same medicine and light to feed out into the collective. So this is one of the very first core components and concepts that I work on with every client who comes through the doors at Unbridled Change, no matter what program that's in, whether it's through the transformational coaching, they kind of come in knowing that this is it, through the energy working, through the space of equine partnered coaching and psychotherapy, through the space of learning how to hold sacred space for others as another professional, and coming into that mentoring, that no matter which doorway you walk through within Unbridled Change, this is going to be a part of it, which is how do I help liberate myself from these different aspects of my life that I just feel fated. I cannot change this. I feel like it just is my story. There was a story of my life and it had a rule book and I had canon associated with me. What would that be? And I just feel like these shackles are going to be on me no matter what. Systemically, collectively, within my family of origin, I cannot break out of this shell. And ideally, what they're coming to me to do is help them break that out, whether that's a physical disease, emotional, mental, spiritual, a restriction in a career or financial ceiling, whatever it is their goal is, how do I step off the fated track of feeling like I cannot change or influence this? And how do I open myself to experiencing a life that I can feel as part of my destiny? I can feel it's part of my soul saying there is something more, that is that story of you was just a chapter and not the whole book of you. And even if you feel like it's the whole book, there's another volume, right? And how do we motivate ourselves to close one chapter and open another? And again, it sounds simple to say that I want to choose the motivation of love. Why would hello, sign me up. Of course I want to pick that one. Of course I want to step into change from loving myself enough to want to move towards that. Of course I want to have compassion and understanding for when I fall short. Of course I want to keep doing it that way. Yet, this is actually a really hard concept to stay in what I call committed action with, because the world is set up right now. This is what we're working on. The world is set up in the complete opposite of this. So this is what most of us have experienced, is the opposite ways of what motivates us into change. And from a very young age, most of us were taught that the way we motivate ourselves is through what I call spurring ourselves on, or fear of a big stick coming down, and not from love at all. Because that's the way the systems tote people in to being in compliance, right? From a very young child, the child is taught that they should what? Respect their elders, pay attention, do what you're told, don't do as I do as I say, like all these different habits that come in through all these different accesses of life and school and church and community and so on and so forth, that many of them are not designed to encourage us through love. They're designed to encourage that child between a power differential that is very, very real. And so as we become adults, we just pick up that same system, and we might say, I have the power to make a different choice. But in reality, we're still running the same drum. We're still beating the same drum over and over and over. And we're teaching ourselves that that's the only option. And so one of the things that I like to do is to give my clients a really strong metaphor, the metaphor of 3 different paths. That with any choice or request that comes to our system, whether that be an internal one, I want to set the intention for me to meet parts of myself with greater compassion, right? That's an inner goal that I'm setting for myself. And I want to do that through love, right? Or maybe there's an external request that comes on you, like, hey, when you're come visit my house, can you mind putting your coat on the coat rack versus slinging it over the back of the sofa or putting it on the chair, right? Like, do you mind putting your coat on the coat rack? Both of those, believe it or not, have the same potential to go wonky in your system as anything else, to feel like oppressed and like how rude and like I need to fight against this request, or to feel like that request is somehow squashing you, oppressing you, that you need to run away from, or feeling like, oh, I'm just going to comply with it because I want the person to like me, to love me, to accept me, to not shun me as a friend, right? Or to shun some part of myself. So I'm doing weird things with it. And that's because there are 3 main ways when any request comes to us that we can work with that request. So imagine that you're standing there, and there in front of you is like door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. The door that is on the left side of you, it says up over top of it, motivation by fear and intimidation. And you look at the door in front of you and it says, motivation by love and compassion and connection. It's right there in the center. And then over here on the right, you have another door that says motivation by bribery and coercion of a reward, right? And so you kind of look at those 3 doors and you go, well, of course, I'm going to pick that middle door. You walk up there, you open that door, and you look in and you realize there's a huge cavern. Like there's no actual path in front of that door. In fact, it looks like there's nothing. It's just this empty canyon between you and whatever the end of that request is, right? From point A to point B. And you go, how the heck am I supposed to go anywhere? There's no path here. And you look around and then you see down on the side, kind of tucked into the corner of this like little place that has a ledge on it, you see some tools, you see some like pillars and things to make a bridge with. And it's like, hey, this is available to you, but you're going to have to make your own bridge to get across this cavern, this motivation by love. Well, of course, you're going to be like, that feels a little risky. Let me take a look and see what else I got. You go over and you check out, you open up that door of motivation of fear and intimidation. And sure enough, it looks pretty much like what you would expect it to look like. It's full of just sticks that are going to beat you and threaten you and pressure. Like once you get on that path, you feel like it's like closing in behind you, forcing you to run as fast as you can down this path. And every time you try to stop, it's just going to put more and more pressure on you, more and more threats on you. Things like, if you don't do this, you will never have my love and attention. If you really cared about me, why would you not do blah, blah, blah? If a good person always does this, so you're not a good person if you don't do this, so you have to do this. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to lose everything. You're going to be destitute. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to make your life even harder. So you need to keep pushing until one or two things happen. You're going to end up totally alone, or you're going to end up, everything that you need. And internal motivation isn't going to get you there, right? So this path all just pushes you and pushes you and pushes you. It uses toxic shame, it uses blame, it uses guilt, it uses threats of having to earn your worth, and you don't have worth until you get to that destination point. It's completely externally based on how it's trying to get you in to that, quote, earning your way to connection and approval and into success. And it's all externally based. You have no ability to say, I think I'm here, until somebody deems you there. This path just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. So even if you think you got there, it might or might not true. So that's that path. You're kind of like, oh, I don't think I want that one. And then you go and you're like, let's try door number 3, right? So you go and you open up that door and you start to say, okay, bribery and incentive. This doesn't look too bad at first. I mean, there's a path, and there's like these little carrots along the way, these little like gems that I can pick up, these little things that like, good job, keep going. Here's your little dopamine award, like keep trucking. But there's one problem with this pathway. My desire is based off of each one of those little nuggets. And what happens if the level of effort that I'm putting in and reaching that goal, I'm not really attached to that goal. I'm only doing it because I keep getting these little nuggets along the way, right? And so if all of a sudden that carrot at the end, the big thing at the end, doesn't have as much weight for me, I don't have an attachment to it. And so now all of a sudden I either got to switch back to the big stick path, or I've got to find that internal path back to that middle door. Both of those are problematic, so I usually just stop. On this path, I usually just sit until something with a bigger stick comes in and gets me moving, or a bigger bribe comes in to get me moving. But either way, I am not doing it from a place of connection. So therefore, this other path looks like I check a box. I do the bare minimum, whatever I need to get by. I declare I'm at a destination. I hope it's the destination, because I really don't want to be there and I really don't want to be doing it. And if you want to motivate me faster or stronger than what I'm doing, you either got to up the carrot or you got to go get a big stick. One of the two things are happening, right? And either one of those side doors are problematic, because the way you get there, if you get there to a destination, you're going to feel resentment, you're going to feel anger, you're going to feel beat up and bullied at the best, and you're not going to be connected with that creation step that you took at all from a place of love. And if anything, it's going to come with a hint of resentment and irritation and a desire to drop it like a hot potato, right? To not really feel a sense of connection or healthy pride or accomplishment in it. So we look back at this middle door and we want to figure out how to do it, right? We want to figure out like, hey, the power for me to motivate myself through love is so much greater than fear. Because if I can figure this one out, I have built this path and nobody can take it away from me. I've built it from my own working with my own inner guidance, allowing myself to believe in myself. But the trick is there's no clear guarantee. There's no outside motivation whacking me with a stick or saying, no, here it is. The motivation for this path, that as we build it, as we construct it, as we walk on that dance with this path, it's going to come from completely inside you. And then therefore it needs to be connected to a pretty strong why, a pretty strong devotion to the purpose as to why you're walking through that door. If you don't have a good why, you don't get very far when you go through this door. And so on both sides, I don't really care about how I feel. On both sides of these doors, I could care less if I feel connected to that part of me that I am forcing or bribing into it, or what I'm showing up for somebody else and how I'm doing that. This middle path, though, it cares. It cares about the type of atmosphere, you could say, or the inner states and the outer states of what that connection, what is the presence that's happening as I'm moving in motion. And it becomes very, very important in this middle path because that's how we experience that is going to determine the way in which we respond, right? And so let me walk this through this just so you can like let this land of the trouble spots that can happen when we motivate ourselves through fear. That again, if something comes along that's scarier or bigger or has more fear attached to it, I have a bigger protective mechanism attached to whatever was getting me motivated to begin with. I'm going to abandon my cause. I'm going to abandon that path. I'm going to abandon whatever I'm up to because that survival threat takes a bigger precedent over whatever threat was in there. So what does this look like? This looks like if I feel like, let's just take a medical thing. Somebody says, hey, you got to get your blood pressure down because you know if you don't get your blood pressure down, that really can impact your longevity of life, your quality of life, all these things. So if you want to have a healthy life, then you better do this. So it's a little bit of mix. It's putting a little bit of fear in there and then a little bit of a carrot. If you want a healthy life, do this. So it's just enough that we start to say, okay, I'm going to take on my blood pressure. I'm going to take on my diet. I'm going to start to have a routine. I'm going to feel that. Well, what if, though, that healthy routine goes against the routine of your family unit? What if your family unit likes the way it's living, likes the way it's eating, feels safe and comfortable with it, and doesn't want to change anything? They view change as something like, well, who do you think you are? Or why do you think this is da-da-da? This, our whole family's just always had high blood pressure. That's just what we have. Or we've always had the sugar stuff. Or we've always had this. And and so then it starts to push back on you. If you have a survival mechanism that says, hey, I need social acceptance over I need my personal health and well-being, you're going to abandon both of those sides because that threat is bigger and you will sacrifice self-health in order to have health in the tribe, right? It's what happens. Then what happens is you feel horrible. You're like, why can't I figure this out? Why can't I make this choice? This is so simple. Why do I reach for that substance, that whatever that is, that throws my health out of balance continuously when I know better? Nobody's forcing me to pick up that thing and shove it in my mouth, but yet I'm doing it. That's because there is something forcing you to do it. It's within your system and it's fear. And the only force that can override that is love. Love for yourself, and ultimately that love that you're hoping that the other people around you maybe can break free from their fears and worries too. But if not, you're still not willing to sacrifice that love for yourself in that. Does that kind of make sense how that goes together? So the power of love is really what activates within us in order for us to fully reach our goals, to feel fulfilled in our goals, and really helping to meet us no matter what might happen outside of us. One of the stories that I really feel resonates with this particular one was a story that I share from a client in my first book, The Horse Cure. And I called her Brenda in there, and Brenda was so kind to agree to share her story in a bigger part. So her story in the book is follows her through multiple sessions. I'm only going to be giving one in the space of time right here. But I really encourage you to check out this chapter for hers if this is speaking to you, because she was willing to share her story in that book and allow that to come forward because she found her voice again, and she found it through love, not through fear. So Brenda was, just trigger warning on her story, any stories that come from me probably include trauma, and include a lot of people that were motivated through fear early on in their life. And so just heads up with that. And so Brenda was a mother of 3 children. And she had those children before she came to us removed from her home due to extreme domestic violence, and drug use. That wasn't her, but there was drug use that was happening in and around the home and around the children. And on the day that they were removed, Brenda was found unconscious, naked, beaten, and bloody almost within an inch of her life on the front yard. And so the neighbor came out to go to work, saw her naked body, bloodied, bodied in there, called the cops, and then they came and were able to find the kids locked in a room. And the perpetrator had been passed out, and then she was out there just absolutely destroyed of in that moment. So of course the local agency brought the kids in, brought them into a safe environment, pressed charges on the perpetrator, and she was left in recuperation. And it took her quite a while to recuperate from this. So during that time, the kids were placed in foster care. Instead of just a temporary placement. And as she was starting to recuperate and gain back use of her body, she was attempting to get back the kids. But at this point, that became very clear she had no housing, she had no transportation, she had no way to care for them. She had a lot of protective mechanisms that were making it appear that she was very dissociative and would not even respond to basic questions when she was asked. She would just be very robotic in her movements. And so she was quickly labeled in the system as non-compliant. She was quickly labeled as what's called passive aggressive combative, because they were taking her, not answering them, not looking at them, not seeing that they were trying to help her help herself, and labeling her as even like slow and not all cognitively there, and having her tested for her intelligence levels. They were trying to motivate her with, if you don't talk to us, if you don't help us out, we cannot give you back custody of your kids. We cannot do this. You cannot pass go. You cannot collect $200. They had tried putting her in multiple different counseling things because testing came back, and they're like, look, she's good. She's great. She's completely capable of having all the things that you're asking her of having. And yet there was a divide. Something was not happening. So she was getting closed out of therapies that were office-based therapies, of saying that she was, again, non-compliant, and that they were not going to be able to be successful with her because she wouldn't talk. And so at a last-ditch effort, she was court ordered to come out to equine partner psychotherapy, and specifically in our parenting coaching side of our program. And when myself and my partner that I work with as a team, as we met with her, she was everything that people said. She was robotic. She came in, she sat down at the corner of the table. Her eyes went down. Her whole demeanor was soft, taking up as little space as she could inside our office. We asked her some basic questions. She answered them with basic, like as few words as possible. She got to the end. She appeared to be dismissive. She appeared to be rude. She appeared to be like uncaring about what was happening around her. However, that's not how I saw her. The way I saw her was a person who was trying to respond to pressure that she didn't know what it was judging her. She didn't know what was happening to her. And she was incredibly scared, and she didn't know what to do. And so she did the only thing she knew what to do at that point, was to put her head down and be quiet, right? And so she was responding in a way that I saw as a trauma response, not as being rude, right? So after we asked her just some really basic questions, I kind of felt really guided, and I shared with her, hey, look, we know that the court's ordered you out here. We know that they're trying to figure out whether or not you would be a good placement to receive the kids back to, or to keep them in foster care. We know that there's a lot of big stuff happening for you, and that you have a story that is just, it's a big story. And I'm so sorry that those different things have happened to you in your life. Here's what we need you to do out here, though. We need you to show up so that we can tell the courts that you're coming. But other than that, that's it. We'll ask some questions. We'll have some horses in the ring. We'll ask you if you want to engage with them and do different activities with them. And ultimately, though, what you share with us is up to you. As long as you're letting the questions kind of come inside and think about them and moving with them through your mind, that's good. That's all we're going to ask you to do. Each and every day, that's it. When you show up here, this is your time. This is what's going to happen. We'll go into the ring. We'll do a couple laps, ask a couple questions, You can answer out loud or inside. And if you agree to do that, that would be beautiful. She sat for a moment. She said yes. And then she said, can I leave now? I said, absolutely. We'll see you next week. Our sessions continued this way. She came in. She waited at the gate for me to unlock it for her. She would walk through the gate. She'd wait for me to lock it. We go take a few laps. I'd say, which way do you want to go, left or right? If she didn't care, then I would pick. If she picked, then I said, okay. And we would take a few laps. We would lob a few generic questions out there and they would sit within her. Then we would come and stand and observe some horses. I'd offer, if you want to go say hi to one, we can. If you want to, whatever it is you want to do, if you want to pet them, we first have to get them to say hi to you because we have consent here. We never touch a horse without their touching us first. I can show you how we do a horsey handshake. And we would give her this information. She would listen. She would be compliant. She was there. And then when her time was up, she would be like, can I leave now, please? And we would say, sure. She would go and stand in front of the gate. She'd wait for me to unhook it. She'd walk through the gate. Out she would go. And this is the way we went week after week. Until one week, she came in and she asked if she could, after we did our laps, she said, can I brush Delilah? Which was she is a beautiful white horse that at the time when this client was out here was incredibly withdrawn. She has been on her own healing journey and now Delilah is a completely different horse. But at the time that this happened, Delilah was very steeped in it. She was incredibly withdrawn. She was incredibly shut down herself. And when she would come out of it, she was like in this terror, flight, fight, attack mode. And then she would go back into dissociation. So there wasn't a whole lot of regulation with her. And I thought that was just interesting that of the 3 horses that were in the arena, that's the one that Brenda wanted to go to. And so I said, sure. I asked her which brush she wanted. She picked one up and she started to walk across the ring. The first time she's walked anywhere by herself without one of us with her. And she stopped like halfway in the ring and I was getting ready to maybe ask her if she needed something. And then I realized I heard her humming and she was kind of swaying back and forth and she was humming and she was singing. And I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. Let's see. And Delilah noticed it too. She perked her little ears up and she was like, oh, what's that? And slowly Delilah would move forward and Brenda would mirror her and move forward a little bit more. And then Delilah would move a little bit more. And pretty soon they ended up right next to each other. But Brenda didn't go to just start brushing her and move through it. She just waited. She had remembered that I said we don't touch a horse without them touching us first. And she was waiting for Delilah to touch her first. And she just kept singing and she kept humming. And I could also tell she was crying. I could hear the cracks in her voice and I could imagine and feel the emotion that was coming off of her. Eventually, Delilah closed the gap and touched her heart space ever so slightly, took a breath together. Brenda reached out, did a little brush, and it was time. The session was over. She turned away. She came back to us. She handed me the brush. I asked her, I could see the tears streaking down her little face. And I said, is there anything you want to share with us? No. Can I go now, please? Absolutely. We'll open the gate for her. Off she walked. She came back in the next week and she asked again. And this time she said, can I put the halter on her? Because the halter was kind of hanging at the side. And we had talked about it before. She had asked what it was at one random moment. I didn't want to do anything with it. And I said, oh, it's like a collar for a horse. We can put it on and it helps make it easier to communicate with them what it is we want, just like a collar and leash of a dog does for a horse. It's the same thing. And so she pointed at it and I said, yeah, absolutely. If Delilah says yes, sure, why not? Do you have any questions about how to use it? She said no. And she picked it up and she repeated the same thing. She stopped about halfway through. She was humming and singing again. And again, she came up and Delilah and her stood for a very long time. with her humming and singing until Delilah finally closed the gap and reached her nose out, touched her heart space. And then Brenda had the halter like in her hand, kind of like, I don't know what to do with this right now. And Delilah, bless her beautiful heart, she like stuck her face in through the whole thing. It kind of went over her head and down on her neck like a collar versus on her head. And she kind of was like a little stunned. Brenda didn't know what to do. She kind of looked back at us. She looked at them, and I just kind of smiled at her and I was like, thumbs up, you're doing great. And she kept kind of singing, and she got a little bit faltered again, and she really didn't know what to do next. And Delilah said, I got you. I'll help you out. And she started walking, and she turned around. She's like, are you coming? And so Brenda started to trail behind her, walking her, and Delilah brought her right to us, right to her treatment team. And as we were kind of sitting there, I smiled and I waited. I didn't start to talk because talking seemed to drive her further into her own inner world. And for the first time, she picked up her head, she looked at me, and she smiled. She allowed that smile to come back and to be there and be a part of her. And I lovingly just returned that smile and then said, wow, it seems like I heard you singing. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, can you share a little bit more about that? And she says, I was nervous, and when I sing, it helps me not feel nervous. And she goes, I didn't know if she would do it, if she would put it on, but she put it on herself. And I was like, yeah, she did. And she said, I like to sing. It makes me feel better. And my kids also liked me to sing. It made them feel better. And we just smiled, and more tears came through her eyes. And she was able to then, with a little crack in her voice, she said, I miss my kids. And we kind of just looked at her with that wide open heart and said, yeah, I can imagine that you miss your kids. You would think she was game over from them. And then after that, we could feel like that was huge for her. And she said, can I go now? And we said, absolutely. She goes, I don't know how to take this off. And I said, well, we'll help you. And so we helped her take it off. She hung it up. She told Delilah, thank you. And she looked at us for the first time and she said, I'll see you all next week. That started a trend for her where she would come in, we would take our laps. She would say, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to get to know this horse or that horse this week, or work with this one. She came up with all of her own activities, or she would ask us like, hey, do you have an idea? I want to get to know them more here. What could I do to do that? And in each one of those activities, she would talk more about how she was there trying to protect her kids, how she would put her own body in the way of the abuser and the kids of trying to do it, that she was the one that had locked them in the room and barricaded the door to keep him from being able to access them because he was too drunk, but he could get to her. And she took him outside and took that and did all of that. And she just had story after story of how she brought her love to these kids in the only way that she knew how. And she brought in her grief, and she brought in her fears, and she brought in her worry, right? And she had this beautiful voice. She was an amazing advocate. She was so incredibly intelligent. And at one point I asked her, I'm curious, Brenda, do you ever allow anybody in the system to see this side of you? And she looked at me like I had 5 heads, and she was like, no. Well, why would I? And I said, well, because I think they've got a really wrong idea, an image of you, because you don't bring the voice to it. And we can tell them that this part of you is here. We can advocate for you, but they've got to see it from you. And one of the things was she was so afraid because every time she tried to explain to them, she got met with, well, why didn't you make a phone call? Why didn't you reach out? Why didn't you call domestic violence? Why didn't you call 911? And each one of those things was something totally outside of her wheelhouse because the way she thought, the only way she knew how to protect her kids was through this certain avenue of what she was doing. And every time they would ask her one of those questions, she felt stupid. She felt wrong. She felt ashamed that somehow she had like failed. and where she felt like she had protected them. And so every time she entered that system, all she felt was shame and us shame for what she didn't do, and nobody was recognizing what she did do. So why would she show up that way? And we started to work on that, and we said, hey, we got to advocate for ourselves. We got to have this voice. We got to have the ability to bring this in a healthy way, because if not, they're never going to hear you and they're never going to be able to see it. And we also came through the door of said, and even if they don't see you, we want you to see yourself. And so this is how we came through the doorway of love. We acknowledged if we don't bring this in here, there's no shot for them being able to see you. However, even if they don't see you, even if you show up with your beautiful voice and it's amazing, and you advocate for yourself and you show them all the amazing growth that you have done and what you're working on to secure housing and all these things, even if they somehow can't see that or don't feel that it's enough, you will know that you value yourself. You will know that you are able to bring your voice out, irregardless of what choices they make. I love her story from the point of view that it's not the perfect ending. So, spoiler alert, but still there's a lot of beautiful things in the book, because there's a few other stories that are so powerful for her, is that at the end, the court did not find that she had enough stability within herself at that moment, at that time, that it had timed out, that they had to decide what to do with these kids. They thought it would take too long for her to figure that out, and so they put them up for being able to be adopted. And it was a huge moment for her. If we had built her voice only being on the goal of getting the kids back off that carrot, at that moment, she would have been completely lost. She would have lost any motivation to find herself. She had a bauble, and there's a story of that in the thing, and it's one of the most powerful stories. I don't have time to tell it today. But she was able ultimately to grab this lifeline that she had created, be willing to show up for herself in the present moment, and realize that her life was still worthy. Even if the courts did this and took her parental rights away, that she still had worth. She could still have a beautiful, amazing life. She still could be available and creating that life, sending the cards to the kids, doing what she could do with DSS keeps. And when they turn 18, if they so want to establish that relationship, they can. That door is open. If they don't, that is sad, that is loss, that is grief for sure. And she's still worthy of having a beautiful life. And so what she was able to choose was that she was worthy of it, that she wanted to still feel family in her life. She wanted to feel healthy relationship within her life. She wanted to feel that she could create housing and transportation and love and excitement for herself. She enrolled herself back in school. She was able to do that. She was able to bring forward this desire to be in her life, even though everything did not go the way she had planned, right? And even though the carrot of why she started her journey was to get her kids back, when that didn't happen, she didn't give up on herself, because what she was motivating herself into change, into well-being, was from love for herself, and ultimately setting up an opportunity of love for those kiddos on the flip side, if and when that did become possible, right? So how did she step through this change? How did she allow herself to get out of that horrible bind that was created both from the trauma in her life and then also the trauma that happened to her within the system, and still stay connected to herself? What she was able to do was, step one, we had to create an environment in which she could remember. And she could see herself the way that we saw her, right? This beautiful, amazing soul. So when we find ourselves lost and bound up and trying to motivate ourselves from fear, we need to build a bridge back to remembering our true self, to remembering the light that is within us. For Brenda, that was, she needed to know that consistently we were going to say what we mean and mean what we say. We had told her, this is what we expect from you. We just need you to show up. We just need you to be willing to walk around the ring a couple times, and you can answer any and all questions to yourself. You have the right to tell us yes, no, and maybe. And as long as you commit to that, we will be here committing to you as well. And she tested that, and she showed up and she showed up, and she realized this was trustworthy. So she was able to move to step two, which is as she started to see that we had respect for her, truly respect for her. We didn't have shadow pity of, oh, this is a poor lady who has had so much trauma, and oh, this is a poor person. Or we didn't judge her. You are a person who got your kids removed. How could you? Blah, 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 all that other stuff. None of that was happening. We were giving her the respect, the honor, the worthiness that she had inherently within her. She couldn't hold that. She didn't feel that for herself. But yet, every time she stepped foot on our property and stepped into that arena, she could feel that coming from ourselves and from the horses. And she knew that we gave that to even the horses, beings that didn't have a voice. We said, look, you just can't go do whatever you want to them. You have to ask them. They have to want to be willing to step in connection with you. And through that example, she got to feel that request of, I can give that respect. From 50 feet away, she would stop and wait for a sign that they were interested in communicating in a closer way with her, right? And she was able to feel that idea, that her thoughts, her emotions, her ideas, her voice were welcomed. Because not only did we welcome it in her, we welcomed it for the horses. And so we were creating this environment that really said all beings have that right. We honor each and every being that's here. So that opened us up like a green light to ding, step three. And step three is, am I willing to hear that yes, no, and maybe? So is that respect only on paper only, or is that real? So if she really said no to us, I don't want to talk about that, would we listen? If she said, can I put that halter on that horse? Would I say no, because I didn't come up with that idea. You can't come up with that idea. Would I really respect and work with her with a yes, no, and maybe? And would I respect that if a horse said that? And the only rule that I had out there was one simple rule, which is the code of conduct of do no harm. And that means that we're not going to hurt each other. We're not going to try to hurt a horse, and we're not going to try to hurt the facility that we're in. If one of those three things is about ready to happen, it was my job and I took that responsibility as that facilitator to say, I'm going to give you a heads up. Whether you listen to my heads up and keep going or not, that's on you. But I'm going to give you a heads up, because sometimes we don't know our actions are about to cause harm. Right? And so sometimes we need to be helped to be able to see it from a different point of view. Now, that never happened with her, but it could have. And if it did, it would have been a place to engage and get curious about, not to judge or to shame. And because she felt that was there, that she truly had a right to say yes, no, or maybe, she was willing to connect. She was willing to be vulnerable. She was willing to take a leap of faith, to ask for things, to share ideas, to share about her, to be in that dance of unknown ideas of, I don't know how to do this, but I want to try. She was willing to share her fears, her worries, her concerns, and ultimately her dreams, her wants, her desires of how to bring those in. And so she was able to open to that fifth step, right? That fifth step that said, we're going to anchor you in you. And even if the outside world goes to heck in a handbasket, if you are anchored to that, there is a way through this. And those choices and that light and that lifeline will be with you every step of the way. So when custody was terminated and that carrot of getting her 3 beautiful children back went away, she was able to re-grab her why and say, I'm worthy of that love. I'm worthy of the family. I know my heart of how I am a good mom, how I am here, and how I want to be with my life. I am not broken. I am not tainted. I am not deserving. Yeah. And It was amazing to watch. That story of that session is in the book. So that's my teaser to get you to go buy the book so you can hear the rest of that story. So in a nutshell, these are the steps, right? These are the steps of that middle path to show up in a way that's trustworthy to ourselves, where we're meaning what we say and saying what we mean. And the way in which we do it feels like it has inherent value and respect and love for ourselves and love and respect for the other. And that truly guides our rules of engagement of how we're willing to work with a yes, no, and maybe within ourselves and with each other, and be in that dance of connection, of vulnerability, of sharing, of having mistakes, of having missteps and misattunements and doing repair work and coming back in. And that we're committed to that because we said that's our trustworthiness. We're going to commit to it. When we have a moment of separation, we're committing to coming back to that. And all of that is tied in to that beautiful why. And it creates an anchor in that bridge that locks it in and says, here it is. The motivation of how we are moving into change, how we are moving into allowing ourselves to evolve, how we're moving into any goal that we want is through that power of love. And it is so much more powerful than fear, because when that fear came forward, the very same thing she was absolutely terrified would happen, she was able to meet that moment. And not only meet it, she was able to see herself through the eyes of her soul, to honor how amazing she was, to honor the grief, the immense amount of grief that was there, and also what wanted to be created, right? And so this is the practice for this week, is to help us remember that as we choose love to motivate ourselves, part of that is being able to see through the eyes of the soul, to being able to witness, just as I was of when I looked at Brenda and who I saw at the end of that table, as that who I saw in the arena each and every day. You know, what would the person or a part of me that I might have some stories with, I might have even disdain for, what would that look like through the eyes of my soul? For her, I saw a person who had gone through trauma, a person who was lost, a person who was struggling, who didn't believe that there was any way, and just robotically marching through, checking boxes because she didn't know of any other thing to do, right? What do I hear in the unspoken words of another or a part of myself when I hear through the ears of the soul? I can hear the pain and the suffering. I can hear the voices of somebody else speaking through them. I can feel where that is. So then what do I feel differently once I can see through the eyes of the soul and I hear through the eyes of the soul or the ears of the soul? What is it that then I feel? My heart is guiding me to feel this situation in a certain way. And it's not shadow pity, and it's not throwing myself on a sword in front of something. The soul would never do that because that doesn't belong to the soul, right? It's like, what ways do we want to feel a compassion and honoring of the worth of that person, even if they're so lost in their stories, right? What ways of thinking, of believing in ourselves, what ways of thinking and seeing the beliefs of how I perceive the world at large would change if I let myself perceive through the quote mind of the divine, right? That universal cosmic mind. What would change if I allow myself to open up that aperture and see it through a bigger perspective? The answers, by the way, to all of this is the way that the power of love will help you see. It will motivate you into actions completely different. It will motivate you into actions that are connected to something greater, to something innately kind, compassionate, and something that brings more harmony and freedom to life instead of restriction and division. It allows me to connect with inner love, acceptance, and guidance, and to what's the best choice of all, each and every moment as I meet that storm and I walk through that storm that I find myself in at that moment. and I have a little bubble around me that doesn't feel the brunt of it. So it is that eye of the center of the storm that we're looking for, that oasis, right? That created that ability to be in there. And this is what allows us to break free from the clutches and the attachments of the other two doors, right? When we can bring these different principles to ourselves of willingness to sense, see, hear, and feel ourselves or a part of ourselves or another through the eyes of the soul, we are going to break free from the trance. Right? We're going to break free of being able to see a glimmer of light, of worthiness, of a beautiful being sitting in front of us that just maybe is very, very lost, whether that's a piece of us or a piece of somebody else. And if we put our goals there, then wow, can you imagine the changes and the ripples that that will create? If we root ourselves into that, how does that then ripple out? The presence that I bring to just walking and the waves of my aura, how that goes off, like what does that bring in? So much more openness, love, compassion, and possibilities rather than more restriction, denseness, fear, and division, right? So everywhere that she went, she only was met with people's fields that were closed and not allowing them to see her in any other light. We didn't do anything special. We really didn't. What we did that was so unique is that ourselves had cultivated the ability to see through the eyes of the soul. And because we had that on board, it just created another environment for her to show up differently. Right? And because she could show up differently, she could remember parts of herself that she had forgotten. She could honor parts of herself that had never been honored before. Like how amazingly brave you are. How wonderful that you were willing to do that and to do the only thing that you knew how to do. How you are so brave because you are still fighting and you are still trying and you are showing up for yourself over and over and over again, motivated from what? Love. And so when we can start to bring this aura to it, the people around us and within us, the parts of ourselves, the different aspects of us, start to feel a different literal atmosphere, a different air, a different frequency, a different vibration in which they can see and feel and connect in totally different ways, right? So if you would like to practice this before we dive into this intention for the week of seeing through the eyes of the soul and bringing that into yourself as we move through, this is coming out in November, so we're moving through the holiday season and all the stuff that's happening in the world right now with that, and being able to be this grounding rod of this is what is needed so much right now. So if you can, just take a moment, take a deep breath in and out. And I'd like you to imagine a time in your life where somebody brought this air to you. They brought this atmosphere. They brought this ability for you to feel seen, felt, and heard, in which allowed you to see and feel and honor yourself in a way you hadn't been able to before. And it could be with a human, it could be with a non-human. And if you're having a hard time finding a moment in your life, don't stress yourself out about it. Just stay with Brenda's story. Use her story as kind of like the launch of what would it feel like to be her in that arena with us? What would that have felt like with her and Delilah out there? What was it giving to her? And so for you, whether you're picking Brenda's story or a spot in your life, just lean in for a little bit. What was happening in your life around that circumstance if you're picking one of yours? If not, just imagine what was happening in her world when she showed up at our arena finally, going through all of what she went through. And for you, what was happening before that moment where you felt that person or that being come in and let you feel seen, felt, and heard in a new way? What are the thoughts, the feelings that you were having about yourself or the world at large? Like those protective belief systems where nobody ever sees me, nobody ever hears me, I'm completely invisible, I should be stupid for even asking for that. Ugh, I'm so yada, yada, yada. No one's going to care. Like what was happening in and around your world? What parts of you did you really feel cut off from during that time frame? Now bring forward that moment or moments, if it's multiple ones that kind of led up, like Brenda's was multiple ones before she really could feel that truth that we were offering her, where you finally felt seen, felt, and heard. What did that change for you? What new glimmers started to wake up within you? In what ways and abilities did you see yourself differently? Did you witness your choices differently? What gifts or light of your soul were you able to reconnect with in that moment, even if it was fleeting and temporary? What lifeline, beautiful grace, thread of grace coming in and connecting you to you could you feel happen in that moment? So I invite you to open to this beautiful Reiki energy that is within you. And let it come to this moment of the timeline that you felt lost in and adrift, really honoring the love and the compassion of how that being got there, right? And really bringing love and compassion, like a soothing little blanket, kind of to the whole timeline. Now, one of my clients call it her, she saw them as little pink pillows. So, you can pick up that one from her. It's like these little pink pillows that kind of come out. If that doesn't feel good to you, just think of it as little gems of light, little light that you're going to tuck into each of those places in that timeline that really do help soften it, that bring that sense of connection and saying, coming home, come home. Nice deep breath in and out. And that's the intention for what we're up to this week. So if it feels good for you this week of soulful practices, the intention is to set that intention that as you walk throughout the week, you're going to be looking for moments where you feel yourself trying to motivate yourself through one of the side doors, fear or bribery and coercion, right? And in those moments where you feel that, either for yourself or doing that with another being, I'm going to ask you to pause. Set that intention right now. When I feel that, I want to pause. I want to stop my feet, literally, wherever I'm at, whatever I'm doing. I want to take 3 grounded breaths. And in that grounded breaths, with each breath cycle, I'm seeking what would my soul like me to see, sense, hear, or feel in this moment? What whispers coming from my heart am I allowing myself to interact with right now at this time? And what type of actions are wanting to come forward that match who I truly am, that are connected to that love and that light, so that I can create something greater, something based in love, and something that is true to my life. When you find yourself and you've stopped and you've invited that guidance in, invite Reiki energy to help give you that grace of courage to engage in the flow of actions that come from that pause, right? To match the whispers of your soul and instead kind of say no to the siren's call. My daughter just read Odysseus, so put the beeswax in your ears, like say no to that siren's call of those protective fears and say yes to the whispers of your heart. And they're harder to hear, so that's why we got to have the pause, right? And then allowing yourself to move in committed action, correct action that matches those invitations from your soul and allows you to face that storm in a completely different way with the calm around you. That is the intention for this week. And so it is. Peace, peace, peace. Nice deep breath in and out. Thank you so much for being with me for this episode and also through episodes seasons 1 and 2. Now is a great time, if you're finding this during the months of November and December, to just peruse, to go into the different episodes, to be with them as we're on this break between seasons 2 and season 3 starting in January of 2025. And also I hope you join me in these different soulful practices live gatherings where where we can ask questions, you can give your shares, and we'll also have some guided healing meditations that I'm sure will come through in each of those sections too. All right, so offering you so much love and light until next time on your journey, Michelle Holling-Brooks with Soulful Practices and Unbridled Change. Thank you for listening to Soulful Practices. For more information on how to work directly with me or one of my guests, check out the show notes below. We'd love for you to also let us know what parts of this episode are speaking to you and how this practice is supporting you on your healing and spiritual journey. Please share this podcast with fellow seekers, travelers. Together, we can create a wave of soul-led beings in this world, offering you light, love, and joy on your journey. Michelle Holling-Brooks. Until next time.